When did you last write a letter to someone you love? Or a card? Or even a postcard? When did you last receive a handwritten mail in the post? Letter writing, or as I like to call it, snail mail, has become an almost forgotten art. Emails and texts are great for everyday communication, but they lack real marks of personality. In these times of social distancing, sending a snail mail to a loved one is a very simple thing you can do that will brighten not only their day but also your own. Snail mail is simply an affectionate term for any mail delivered by the postal system. It's obviously slower than electronic mail, but what it lacks in speed it makes up for in conveying things that electronic mail cannot. The feel of the paper, the flow of the handwriting, the knowledge that a human hand has written these words, doodled in the corner, smudged the ink. In this film, I'm going to show you a range of simple but effective ideas and techniques to add personal and creative touches to cards, letters and envelopes that are guaranteed to bring a smile when they land on your recipient's doormat. To set you thinking, let's start by considering what elements make up a snail mail and what options we have for writing and personalising it. At the most basic level, all you need is a sheet of paper. These I've torn out of an old lined notebook. It's actually a rather nice smooth surface to write on. I've got inkjet paper, which again is very smooth to write on, quite thin. 300 GSM card, slight colour on the one side. This will be really nice if we want to make our own cards later on. I also found these, which are actual watercolor postcards. Quite a nice idea if you want to create your own artworks on those. You might have an existing greetings card. Even here we can personalize this to a large extent by adding our own creative touches. These pre-printed miniature envelopes are rather cute and might also give us some inspiration and ideas of creative touches to add to our own. Next question, what sort of pen or writing implement are you going to use? Now it may be that all you've got at home is an ordinary ballpoint pen. If so, that's absolutely fine. We can create some beautiful, intricate designs and artwork, doodles, just with a biro. Or you may have your own favourite writing implement, your own favourite pen that you love the feel of, you love the flow of the ink, you love the feel of the scratch on the paper. Then there's the actual text of the letter itself. Whom are you going to write to? Why? What are you going to tell them? Are you going to scribble a quick, "Hi, how are you? Wish you were here"? Or are you going to sit and write a long, long letter of many pages? If you're like me, you often sit down to write a quick note and you end up writing a much longer letter. Some letters seem to write themselves. And then there are postage stamps. No snail mail would be complete without a stamp. I owe my love of stamps to my friend Kirstine. Kirstine, big shout out if you're listening. Years ago, Kirstine showed me her collections of stamps, and I remember being mesmerised by these beautiful miniature works of art that she'd meticulously laid out, and that has always stayed with me. Stamps are inherently very beautiful in their own right, and so they make a wonderful way to begin to think creatively about adding personal and artistic touches to your snail mail. I've collected them ever since, not for the sake of collecting them, but for actually using them. And I've often sent snail mails plastered in stamps to Kirstine and others, and have a reputation for using stamps that are older than me. If you're using an envelope, you have the option to enclose something thoughtful or meaningful along with your letter. Let's see, for example, we might enclose a decorative bookmark. This one happens to be themed on cats. Or a tea bag, in the spirit of enjoy a cuppa. Perhaps we'll have one together sometime soon. Or a little pocket hug, very appropriate for these times when we sadly can't give real ones. Or a simple affirmation. This one was sent to me by my beautiful friend Hannah. Hannah, speak for yourself. We all need reminding of these simple truths. And then of course there are all of the accessories that go along with letter writing. So you've got decorative letter openers, you've got wax for sealing in many different colours, and of course the beautiful stamps that go with the wax. And you've also got pen nibs themselves, which are often very beautiful. These I actually had the pleasure of cutting and stamping myself at the Pen Museum in Birmingham last year. A couple of important points. If you're sharing photos of your own creative snail mails, please make sure that you're not revealing a personal address or message. And in these times of the COVID pandemic, avoid licking stamps or envelopes. Save yourself the unpleasant aftertaste of the adhesive and instead use a paintbrush and tap water. So I started with a fun experiment. I typed up a letter to my friend Julie, who loves Alice in Wonderland. I chose a swirly, old-fashioned typeface, printed it out on a laser printer, and then set fire to it. Yes, literally. Of course, I only let the edges of the letter burn to create the look of an old tattered manuscript. A safer technique is to tear the edges of the paper. I prepared a few sheets for experiments, which you'll see later. And then I put the kettle on. We can use both tea bags and instant coffee to add creative touches to our snail mail. Let's start with the coffee. I'm going to use it mostly for painting with, so it needs to be really thick. Think coffee soup. Add the tiniest bit of hot water to your coffee granules and then stir and mash them up as thoroughly as possible until they've all dissolved. Now we'll set aside the coffee for later, and we'll use a tea bag to stain our pages of old parchment. Make sure you work on a surface that can be easily wiped down afterwards, as it can get rather messy. And don't forget the reverse of your paper. The more blotchy and uneven, the more effective it will look. Let's crumple up the paper to make it look even older. Prepare a few sheets and then set them aside to dry. We'll come back to those later. When decorating envelopes, make sure to leave space for your recipient's name and address. It makes sense to start your design in a corner and let it evolve into a frame for the text. An ordinary biro is great for adding intricate patterns and doodles. I usually start by thinking of a theme, something that links with the person I'm writing to. This letter is going to my friend Layla, for example, for whom I once created an H.P. Lovecraft-inspired mask, hence the swirling tentacles. The octopus also links with letter writing being a source of ink. Snails often feature on my snail mails, and why not? Their spiral shells are so beautiful. Snails remind us to slow down, take our time, pause our hectic lives for a few minutes, which is one of the best things about letter writing. Not only do you brighten someone else's day when you send them a mail, but it can also help you to relieve your own stress and anxiety. So it's a wonderful boost for mental health and well-being all round. Letter writing works on many levels. It's a calming activity. It can be therapeutic to write and share our news and experiences. We can enjoy the flow of handwriting, which is so different to typing or texting. We can add creative and personal touches that will bring a smile. If we carefully open up an existing envelope, we can use it as a template to begin creating our own stationery, using coloured or patterned paper. I found a sheet of paper with a shiny metallic foil on one side, slightly embossed with a cobweb pattern. If you have paper with a pattern or colour only on one side, you have the option to make that either the inside or the outside of your envelope. Simply draw around your template. This one conveniently fits precisely onto any standard A4 sheet of paper. Cut it out with scissors or a craft knife, doesn't need to be too precise. And then carefully score along all of the lines that will need to be folded. Wondering what instrument is best for scoring? How about a metal letter opener? This seemed an appropriate choice. It actually worked rather well, being neither too blunt nor too sharp. You want to score the lines, not cut them. When you've finished scoring, you can fold the paper to make your envelope. I'm putting the metallic foil on the inside of my envelope as a little surprise for the recipient when they open it. We'll glue this together later on, but first let's find some interesting paper to make more envelopes. Old atlases and maps, sheet music manuscript, and calendar pages can all be a useful source of making stylish envelopes. A great way to recycle old picture calendars too. If you're unsure about where best to place your template on the paper to get the best design, you can often hold both of them up to a light source to get a better idea. I even chopped up part of an old palette knife painting on thin card to exploit its abstract patterns, slight textures and iridescent colours. When gluing your envelopes, use an adhesive that's strong enough to ensure they won't fall apart in the post. And be careful not to get glue inside the actual envelope, otherwise it will obviously be difficult to insert your letter. You can of course use tape instead. When you've glued your envelope together, it's best to place some weights on it to ensure a firm bond. Now, back to my Alice in Wonderland themed letter to Julie, which I've already typed, printed, burnt around the edges, stained with a tea bag, and crumpled up to give the appearance of old parchment. I used black biro and felt pen to add some appropriate vignette illustrations, loosely based on Sir John Tenniel's original engravings, adapted in the form of silhouettes. Ballpoint pen allows you to achieve a fine level of detail if you want it. These embellishments can be made to fit neatly around the text of your letter, or even to interact with it. The tea bag stained paper actually makes a lot of sense for the Mad Hatter's tea party. Coloured pencil on black paper envelopes can work well. Here I'm drawing sunflowers to send to my friend Hannah, whom I mentioned earlier. Hannah showed me the amazing sunflowers in her garden last month. She is one of the most prolific letter writers I know, with 90-something pen pals all over the world. Glowing colours on a dark background can be dramatic and beautiful, also symbolic of hope in challenging times. White pencil crayon is particularly effective for adding definition. Think of light pouring through stained glass. I'm no calligrapher, but I do love adding freestyle flourishes to lettering on envelopes. A few simple swirls and spirals can be surprisingly decorative. Now back to the coffee soup we made earlier. Why not use the base of a coffee mug to print with? I'm going to use my Lois mug to print snail mails to my two fellow Loises, who both have their birthdays next week. Using a mug to print with coffee gives an authentic and not too perfect circle, which can be used for many things. In this case, I'll turn it into the moon. The pre-stained, pre-crumpled paper gives a really interesting texture to paint on with coffee. Let's add a little moon-gazing hair. Where you want the colour to be darker, you can build up the coffee pigment to be more intense. Let's add some fields too, but I'm leaving a space in which to write a little note. If you're creating old parchment effect stationery, you may want to make some envelopes to match. These can also be painted with coffee pigment. As before, make sure to leave space for your recipient's name and address, and think about where the stamps will go. Plastic glue spreader is a really useful tool for painting, roughly equivalent to a traditional artist's palette knife. It can be used in very similar ways. This allows you to do many things you can't easily do with a brush, including placing paint in a long, thin line. The glue spreader has a convenient handle to stop your fingers getting stained with the coffee pigment. Again, I'm adding decorative motifs around the edges of the envelope, leaving space for the address in the middle. Nature and the seasons are an abundant source of inspiration and imagery for decorating snail mails. I'm going to send this postcard to my friend Kathy, who loves Paris. If you don't have a glue spreader handy, you might have old store cards or credit cards that you can chop up to make palette knife substitutes with varying lengths of sides. Always worth thinking about what length of edge you want. Simply pick up the pigment along the edge of the card and place it on the paper to make a mark. My next piece is a card for my friend Kirsty, who adopted a rescued koala named Paul after the devastating Australian bushfires. Tragically, Paul later died from his injuries, so I'm doing a little portrait of him, mostly using silver and white coloured pencils on black card. Coloured pencil shows up surprisingly well on black paper and can be used very precisely, sharpened to a fine point, or very loosely, as here. I'm making an envelope to go with the card. I've stenciled coffee pigment around a simple paper cut of Australia onto a blank white envelope, so that I can write Kirsty's address inside the shape of the continent. And now I'm adding a little koala silhouette in the corner. As I mentioned earlier, the darker you want the colour to be, the more you need to build up the coffee to make it really intense. So I keep adding a bit more of the pigment while the painting is still wet. I'm not really a coffee drinker myself, but my studio smells strongly of coffee these days. I've made a simple Z-fold card to fit inside an envelope. I'm using a slightly smaller mug to print the moon this time. The long, narrow format of this card suggests a panoramic landscape, so I'm adding details of a tree and branches and using a sponge to add atmosphere. Other tools come in handy too. This plastic fork is a fun way to sketch in grass and foliage. I'm adding a fox, one of my favourite animals as it happens, in this case inspired by the name of my friend Sam's art gallery, Fox Yard Studio. Because of the Z-fold format of the card, the fox can either stand alone or in a moonlit landscape. When the coffee has slightly dried, you can use the fork to scratch back into the pigment to great effect. Still on a Viking theme, I'm decorating a letter to my friend Sue, who is a great fan of Thor. So let's do a coffee sketch of the Marvel hero, brandishing his hammer, summoning up the thunder and lightning. The edges of the store cards I was using earlier to print the Eiffel Tower are also great for dragging the paint around with lots of energy to suggest a lightning bolt. At this point I decided to have a go at writing with a traditional quill pen. I cut and trimmed this large feather myself with a scalpel and made a small slit for the ink. Sure enough, it worked. There is something wonderfully timeless about writing a letter with a quill pen, dipping the nib into your inkwell, hearing the scratch of the pen on your paper. The coffee makes surprisingly good ink too, and has a colour reminiscent of old-fashioned sepia cuttlefish ink, so it looks the part. So now let me run past you some more ideas for simple doodles and decorative motifs using minimal art materials and tools. Now, for my next snail mail, I set myself the challenge to combine 3 of my friend Annie's favourite themes: stamps, coffees and dinosaurs. This was fun. As I said earlier, stamps are inherently decorative in their own right, so I often use them as inspiration for a snail mail theme, especially if I find a pictorial stamp that reminds me of someone. Sometimes it works the other way. When I happen to find the perfect stamp to go on a snail mail I've already written, which is what happened in this particular case when, remarkably, I found I had a Stegosaurus stamp. For my friend and fellow Ipswich artist Anne-Marie, I wanted to depict a local scene, so I chose one of my favourite Ipswich landmarks, our beautiful Elizabethan Christchurch mansion, painted using coffee and DIY palette knife substitutes. In this case, the coffee suggests the warm red brick of the architecture, and the edge of the plastic glue spreader and store cards are perfect for printing window frames and scribbling foliage. Collage is another great technique for creative snail mail designs, and also a good way to recycle old magazines, newspapers, calendar pictures, maps, and so on. In this case, I cut up pages of an old calendar of antique maps and added some details with ballpoint pen to create an Art Deco inspired card for Janine. The circular shapes of ancient world maps linked nicely with the stylized elegance of Art Deco. Pattern shears add a decorative edge to the collage elements. This next piece is for Monica, whose beautiful mandala art has inspired me, as it has many others. Monica is Italian, so of course this one had to be a coffee mandala. Here are some more simple creative ideas for personalising snail mails. I love to use a wax seal and stamp on my envelopes. Watching the wax melt over a flame, pouring it onto the back of the envelope, often with a few authentic drips for good measure, and pressing the stamp into the molten wax is a timeless and beautiful experience, and a lovely way to add a further special feature to your snail mail. This Tree of Life design is one of my favourites. I really hope you've enjoyed this look at creative snail mail and feel inspired to start sending letters with creative and personal touches of your own. I would love to see how you get on. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my YouTube channel for free updates and like and comment below if you enjoyed. If you click the little bell icon on my channel page, you'll be notified of every new film I upload. Many thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay creative, stay in touch.